crash was coming, and I was the first to see it. 24 hours after the FBI raided the Morrison building, after they arrested my mother and Vincent Torino and dozens of corrupt officials, I thought the nightmare was over. I thought justice had won. I thought I could finally go back to flipping houses and living a normal life. I was wrong about everything. What I didn't understand was that my mother's criminal empire wasn't just about contaminated real estate. It was the foundation of Manhattan's entire luxury housing market. When the FBI shut down her operation, they didn't just arrest a few criminals. They collapsed an economic system that had been propping up billions of dollars in property values. My name is Michael, and this is the story of how exposing environmental crimes crashed the New York real estate market. How my testimony destroyed the lives of thousands of innocent people. How doing the right thing made me the most hated man in America. The arrests made international headlines. Largest environmental crime ring in U.S. history exposed. FBI raids uncover $2 billion real estate conspiracy. Mother-son crime dynasty built empire on poison land. My face was on every news channel, every newspaper, every social media platform. Not as a hero who'd exposed corruption, but as the son of a mass murderer. The kid who'd been raised by America's most successful environmental terrorist. The FBI had put me in protective custody at a safe house in Queens while I prepared for grand jury testimony. Agent Vasquez explained that Vincent's organization had cells in multiple cities, and there might still be people loyal to my mother who wanted revenge. How many people did she actually kill? I asked during one of our debriefing sessions. Agent Vasquez opened a thick file folder. Direct murders, investigators, whistleblowers, people who got too close to the truth. We've documented 43 confirmed cases going back to 1987. And indirect deaths. Cancers, birth defects, neurological disorders from contaminated housing. She paused, looking at statistics that made her visibly sick. Conservatively, 8,000 people. Realistically, probably closer to 15,000. 15,000 people. My mother had killed 15,000 people over 30 years, and I'd been living off the profits my entire life. Every meal I'd eaten, every piece of clothing I'd worn, every roof over my head had been paid for with blood money. But the arrests were just the beginning of the nightmare. Within 48 hours of the raids, property values across Manhattan began to collapse. The FBI had released a preliminary list of buildings constructed on contaminated sites, over 200 luxury apartments, condos, and office buildings. Properties worth billions of dollars were suddenly worthless. The panic spread beyond the confirmed contaminated sites. If the FBI had identified 200 poisoned buildings, how many more were there? Which developments could residents trust? What other real estate companies were involved in similar schemes? Banks that had provided construction loans began calling in debts. Insurance companies started canceling policies. Residents filed class action lawsuits against developers, management companies, and city officials who'd approved the projects. Within a week, Manhattan real estate prices had dropped 40%. Properties that had been worth $10 million were selling for $6 million. Developments that had been under construction were abandoned. Construction workers, real estate agents, mortgage brokers, thousands of people lost their jobs overnight. The media wanted a villain, and they'd found the perfect one, me. The ungrateful son who destroyed his own mother's business empire and crashed the real estate market in the process. Michael Rodriguez, hero or economic terrorist, read one headline. The kid who killed Manhattan real estate was another. Cable news shows debated whether I was a whistleblower protecting public health or a traitor who destroyed thousands of jobs for personal gain. Social media was even worse. Death threats flooded my suspended accounts. People posted my photo with bounties on my head. Real estate investors who'd lost millions were offering cash rewards for information about my location. The worst part was the interviews with affected families. The news showed footage of young couples who'd bought their dream apartments in contaminated buildings. Parents with sick children who couldn't afford to move. Elderly people who'd invested their life savings in properties that were now worthless. My daughter has leukemia, one mother told CNN reporter outside a building that had been evacuated. The doctors say it's probably from environmental contamination. We live in a luxury apartment we paid $2 million for, and it's been poisoning our family for 3 years. Michael Rodriguez's mother built this building, the reporter noted. Then Michael Rodriguez destroyed our lives, the woman replied, staring directly into the camera. I hope he's happy. But the media coverage revealed something even worse than individual tragedies. The contamination wasn't limited to my mother's properties. Her operation had been so successful that other real estate companies had started copying her methods. Buying contaminated land, doing minimal cleanup, and developing luxury housing on poisoned ground. Environmental inspections at properties across the city were revealing contamination everywhere. Buildings in Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, neighborhoods that had never been connected to my mother's organization. The entire New York real estate market had been built on a foundation of environmental crime. Dr. Sarachun, the real EPA administrator, not the one who'd been taking bribes, held a press conference that made national news. "What we're discovering goes far beyond the Torino-Rodriguez conspiracy," she announced. "We've identified over 400 residential buildings in New York City that show signs of soil contamination. These properties house approximately 50,000 residents, including 12,000 children. 50,000 residents, 12,000 children, all potentially being poisoned by their own homes." 3 weeks after the arrests, I was called to testify before a Senate subcommittee investigating environmental crimes in real estate development. The hearing was broadcast live on C-SPAN, with senators from both parties competing to look tough on environmental crime. I sat at a witness table facing a semicircle of senators who looked like they wanted to blame me for everything from the real estate crash to global warming. Behind me, the gallery was packed with reporters, families of contamination victims, and people who'd lost money when property values collapsed. Senator Patricia Williams from New York led the questioning. "Mr. Rodriguez, did you know that your actions would cause billions of dollars in economic damage?" "Senator, I was trying to prevent people from being poisoned by contaminated housing." "But you knew that exposing these crimes would crash property values." "I knew that hiding these crimes was killing people." Senator James Morrison from New Jersey, no relation to Judge Morrison, who is now in federal prison, took a different approach. "Mr. Rodriguez, how long did you live off profits from your mother's criminal enterprise?" "My entire life, Senator. I didn't know where the money came from until I was 22 years old." "So you benefited from environmental terrorism for 2 decades?" "Yes, sir. Without knowing it." "And now you expect us to believe you're a hero for exposing crimes you profited from?" The questions went on for 4 hours. Senator after senator grilled me about my mother's operation, my knowledge of the contamination, my decision to cooperate with the FBI. Some treated me like a whistleblower deserving protection. Others treated me like a co-conspirator who'd turned on his family to save himself. But the most devastating testimony came from Dr. Maria Santos, a pediatric oncologist from Mount Sinai Hospital. "In the last 5 years," Dr. Santos told the committee, "we've seen a 340% increase in childhood leukemia cases in Manhattan, a 280% increase in brain tumors, a 450% increase in birth defects. These aren't random statistics. These are children whose lives have been destroyed by criminal negligence." She clicked to a slide showing a map of Manhattan with red dots marking cancer clusters. Every one of these dots represents a contaminated development. Every dot represents families who thought they were buying safe homes for their children. Senator Williams asked the question everyone was thinking. "Dr. Santos, if these contamination levels are as dangerous as you claim, why didn't anyone notice the health effects earlier?" Dr. Santos' answer made my blood run cold. "Senator, someone did notice. Multiple researchers, including myself, have been documenting these health effects for over a decade. We submitted reports to the EPA, the Department of Health, the CDC. All of our reports were buried or suppressed." By whom? By officials who were taking bribes from the Torino-Rodriguez organization. By administrators who were more interested in protecting real estate values than protecting public health. The corruption had been even deeper than I'd realized. My mother hadn't just bribed officials to ignore contamination. She'd bribed them to suppress evidence that contamination was killing people. By the time my congressional testimony ended, the real estate crash had spread beyond Manhattan. Property values in Brooklyn dropped 35%. Queens fell 30%. Even the Bronx, which hadn't been directly connected to my mother's operation, saw prices decline 20%. The economic ripple effects were devastating. Construction companies that had been building luxury developments went bankrupt. Real estate firms that specialized in Manhattan properties closed their doors. Banks that had invested heavily in New York real estate started failing. But the human cost was worse than the economic damage. Families who'd bought contaminated properties couldn't sell them and couldn't afford to move. They were trapped in homes that were slowly poisoning them, watching their children get sick while property values continued to fall. The government's response made everything worse. FEMA started relocating families from the most contaminated buildings, but the temporary housing was inadequate. Families who'd been living in luxury apartments found themselves in motel rooms and emergency shelters. The class action lawsuits began piling up. Residents sued developers, management companies, city officials, and banks. But the legal process was slow, and most families needed help immediately. Children were sick. Parents were losing jobs. Medical bills were mounting. I tried to help by setting up a victim assistance fund using money I'd made from my legitimate real estate deals. It wasn't much, maybe $200,000 total, but I wanted to do something for the families I'd inadvertently hurt by exposing the truth. The gesture backfired spectacularly. News reports portrayed it as blood money, profits from contaminated real estate being used to buy forgiveness from victims. Protesters gathered outside the offices of the charity I'd tried to work with, carrying signs that read, "We don't want your dirty money," and "Michael Rodriguez, environmental terrorist." One protester, a father whose son had been diagnosed with brain cancer, gave an interview that went viral. "Michael Rodriguez's family poisoned my child, then crashed the economy, so we can't afford treatment. Now he wants to give us charity. We want justice, not guilt money." The media attention and public hatred were destroying what was left of my personal life. My relationship with Lisa ended when reporters started harassing her at work, asking questions about whether she'd known about my family's crimes. "I can't do this anymore," she told me during our final phone call. "Every day someone asks me if I'm dating a terrorist. Every day someone wants to know if I was part of your mother's operation. I can't live like this." My real mother, the woman who'd raised me before I discovered she was a criminal, was struggling even worse. The media had discovered her real identity and her cooperation with the FBI. She'd started receiving death threats from people who'd lost money in the real estate crash. "Maybe I should have stayed quiet," she told me during one of our supervised visits. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in a month. "Maybe your father was right to try to stop this from the beginning. Dad tried to stop Mom's operation. That's why she had him killed. He'd found evidence of the contamination and was going to take it to the authorities. She couldn't let that happen." Learning that my father had died trying to do exactly what I'd done made everything worse. He'd been a hero, and his reward was death. I'd been a hero, and my reward was becoming the most hated person in America. The FBI protective custody was supposed to keep me safe from Vincent Torino's remaining associates, but it couldn't protect me from the court of public opinion. Everywhere I went, people recognized me. Restaurants refused to serve me. Hotels wouldn't give me rooms. I couldn't use credit cards because my name would trigger recognition. Agent Vasquez tried to help by arranging witness relocation, but where could I go? The story was international news. My face had been on television screens around the world. There was nowhere to hide from what I'd become. The worst part was the doubt that started creeping in. Had I done the right thing? Yes, I'd exposed environmental crimes and saved lives. But I'd also destroyed the lives of thousands of innocent people who'd done nothing wrong except buy homes they thought were safe. The families living in contaminated buildings were victims of my mother's crimes. But the families who'd lost everything when the real estate market crashed were victims of my decision to expose those crimes. How do you weigh those competing responsibilities? 6 months after the arrests, I was living in a studio apartment in Newark under an assumed name, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. I couldn't work in real estate. No one would hire me. I couldn't start a business. Investors wouldn't trust me. I couldn't even apply for normal jobs because background checks would reveal my identity. That's when I got a call from Dr. Elena Vasquez, the real FBI agent, not the one who'd been posing as Vincent's corrupt doctor. "Michael, there's something you need to know. We've been investigating other cities, looking for similar operations. And we found them. Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Miami, Chicago. Real estate companies using the same methods your mother pioneered. Buying contaminated land, hiding environmental reports, developing luxury housing on poisoned ground." My heart sank. The nightmare wasn't over. It was spreading. The estimated number of victims is over 100,000 people living in contaminated housing across 6 major cities. Children with cancer, families with birth defects, entire neighborhoods being slowly poisoned. What do you want me to do? We want you to help us investigate these operations. You understand how they work better than anyone else. You know what to look for, how to gather evidence, how to infiltrate their networks. You want me to go undercover again. We want you to finish what you started. Your mother's operation was just the beginning. There's a whole network of environmental criminals using real estate development to poison communities for profit. The offer came with a new identity, FBI protection, and the chance to help take down the people who were copying my mother's methods. It also came with the certainty that I'd be risking my life again, that I'd be investigating people who'd already proven they were willing to kill to protect their operations. But it also offered something I'd been searching for since the arrests, a chance to do more good than harm. A chance to save more lives than I'd destroyed with my testimony. There's one more thing, Agent Vasquez added. We've identified the person who's been coordinating these operations across multiple cities. The one who's been teaching other companies how to replicate your mother's methods. Who? Vincent Torino. He didn't just work for your mother. He was franchising her operation, selling her techniques to real estate companies across the country. Even from prison, he's still running the network. Vincent was still out there, still poisoning people, still profiting from environmental terrorism. And he was about to learn that some investigations never really end. They just get bigger. I stood in my studio apartment in Newark, looking out at the city where this whole nightmare had started. In the distance, I could see the skyline of Manhattan, where luxury buildings were still being evacuated, where families were still getting sick, where the real estate market was still reeling from the truth I'd exposed. Agent Vasquez waited on the phone for my answer. Go undercover again. Risk my life again. Help take down a network of environmental criminals that's stretched across the country. Or disappear. Change my name, move to another country, try to build a normal life somewhere far from the consequences of my family's crimes. The choice should have been easy. I'd already lost everything. My family, my girlfriend, my reputation, my future. I had nothing left to risk. But I kept thinking about Dr. Santos' testimony. About the children with cancer. About the families trapped in contaminated housing. About the 100,000 people in 6 cities who were being slowly poisoned while real estate companies got rich. My mother had spent 30 years building an empire on poisoned land. Maybe it was time for me to spend the rest of my life tearing it down. Agent Vasquez, I said, when do we start?